Go ahead.
Do I share?
Go ahead, please, Erin. Yes, you're on.
Oh, so you've got my screen.
Yes, we can see your screen.
Okay, love. Listen, this board that I've put up here, today what we're going to talk about, and prior to our, setting up for the talk, I was just relating that for some reason the ancestral legacy, as I was sort of fantasizing it and had created a PowerPoint for, when I woke up this morning, I realized that I wanted to do another one, a different one. So I recreated this morning, and unfortunately, that I'm very happy with its results, because the example that I had was fine and lovely, but I really have an excellent one for you guys today. There's this word epigenetic, and I just came across it not long ago, like a few weeks ago. And so I printed out a little blurb on it. It's called Epigenetics 101. It's called A Beginner's Guide to Explaining Everything. And there's claiming here, of course, that the word is everywhere, but of course it's only everywhere within a particular, league of science, which is not ours. But it is in the league of what I'm talking about. And I really am not, I mean, you can get books on Amazon for nothing now, or ebooks and all of that. So my book on family dynamics is my apology, if you will, my statement and my support for families and tribes of all types, of which we fall into it. So, essentially our relationship, you'll see, it's so interesting, isn't it? Like what went on this morning is quite typical in my family. And so, it's like, all right, who put that there and where and why? Okay, and where is it anyway, after all? And so I looked up epigenetic legacy, and I printed out just a 3-page thing, which I'm not going to read out, but I will explain what it is. And it's so irritating, because why don't they start to read and learn astrology? Because all science is trying to do is reinvent the wheel. The wheel being, of course, the eternally turning image of the horoscope as it really is seen from Earth, with the sun in the sky and the inner planets and all of that. Anyway, they write about epigenetics as a mysterious DNA. And it's called a histone with DNA, and it's a picture of a DNA that's wrapped in a kind of circle, and in the center of the circle, it's a double helix, of course, the DNA, is wrapped around 4 histone proteins in a structure called a nucleosome, okay? And they have to do with tags, molecular tags. Now, we all know so far that twins do not develop in the same way. I mean, identical twins. I mean, they run in my son-in-law's family, and there's a point at which the way they receive their environment is going to tag aspects upon the DNA structure, flagging it to fire differently, so that by the time they're in their sort of like late 20s, 29, Saturn return, twins actually they still might be giving each other the same fuzzy pink sweater for Christmas with the same wrapping paper. They still might be doing that. But their relationship issues, their whole, dynamic towards dealing with the world around them is more, I think, impacted, if you will, by the ancestral league and the many billions of people that feed into our single little self. And this diagram I have here on the opening page here shows you, yeah? And then that's your 4th house. That's your house. That's your family, right? Well, it's not just your upline, your mother, father, their mother and father, their mother and father, on into infinity, or back to Alice or whomever was the first human being. But the 4th house, is the container of your own family of origins, but also predisposes itself towards your family of creation. So there's you in the middle of all this activity of upline, the family, And then downline, if you create a family, like have children or, literally biological children, because we'll find out that what they describe here in epigenetics and our experiences, one sentence I will read. Any outside stimulus that can be detected by the body, which is soma and the 6th house in the horoscope, has the potential to cause epigenetic modifications. Oh, wow. It's not yet clear exactly which exposures affect which epigenetic marks, nor what the mechanisms and downstream effects are, but there are a number of quite well characterized examples, from chemicals to lifestyle factors to lived experiences. Well, the problem is they're always dealing with rats and stats. They're not dealing with the evidence and the experience of empirical observation, such as I have with families, such as you have. It's kind of like, I love the new cover that Weiser did for the second edition of Family Dynamics. But there's one thing here, it says childhood abuse, for example. Childhood abuse and other forms of early trauma also seem to affect DNA methylation patterns, which may help to explain poor health that many victims of such abuse face through adulthood. Not least of which is drug abuse and ways of escaping, going into Neptune. Let me get back to God. I want my soul. Yeah, let's not be in the body. Let's go to the 12th house. And so when I worked on this topic, I found this fabulous picture ages ago. I store pictures like this. This is, in fact, a picture of us, Earth, going round the sun, and the sun and Earth pointing at the center of which from our view, the galactic center, 26 degrees of Sagittarius, which happens to be opposite my Uranus. How interesting. So I think that's a kind of incarnational picture, don't you think? It is a DNA. We are creating and have within us the structures that we need to know as astrologers, and the more deeply we go into it, the more profoundly we are realizing exactly how we have, got information that, has been known for, on many levels. When they talk, for instance, about research on the epigenetic inheritance of addictive behavior, it's not advanced. Well, all you have to do is look at your family and then your grandparents or ask some questions. Addictions are different. One might have a shopping addiction. Another one might have, I'm late, I'm always late addiction. Sorry. Another one is addicted to drugs. Another one might have, as a result, my father was, both my parents were like, poor things, ended up just absolutely disgustingly alcoholic, just sickening. And I am not an alcoholic. I have the great good fortune of one of the last drugs that I use is I can have a couple glasses of wine at night. I really like that. And I made that as I've been through the 60s and all my whole most fascinating and wildly active life, I decided that at one point because I never drank wine until I never even had alcohol to speak of until I was like in my 30s, in my post-Saturn return. And then, it got a little more classy in the 80s and, things started looking, and it was champagne and wine. And I thought, I think that I would like to have one drug of choice at the end of my life, and one would be pot, and the other one would be glasses of wine. And so here I am, almost 70, and the Queen Mother is still having her double G&T every night, and she's almost 100. So I'm thinking, maybe there's hope. I get to keep a couple of addictions, as well as obsessive compulsive behaviors. But then how do you think people get smart? Okay, let's get back to astrology and not me. I put this picture up just to emblazon in your mind that we're really going to be dealing with 3 houses just to make life a little easier. And in order to make it easier, I just picked out the 4 houses that in family dynamics, and I've just been reading parts of it again. I cannot tell you how amazed. It's as if I've read it. I've never read it before. And I often find that. And what I did find was that the 4th house, as I said earlier, is your family dynamic. Your mother, your father, their mother, father, on back through the line. The 8th house is lateral ancestors like cousins, aunts, uncles, people who are kind of exiting out from the central force. And the 12th house, I have always been fascinated with Neptune. When I first began astrology, I didn't have any, I mean, Neptune is definitely what it is. Like, it's invisible, it's shape-shifting, it's difficult to describe. How do you use words? Well, I happen to really love words, and I have found loads of them for it. But when I was first studying, and I had all the, sort of the few books that were out, one was Rex Bills's Keywords, and everybody had it, and everybody has it, and should have read it anyway. But under Neptune, they were like vague, nebulous, undecided, invisible, unseen, uncertain. And I thought, oh, that's really helpful. I mean, what am I supposed to do with that? So that I have to spend sort of 30 years, keeping Rex Bills in mind and saying, you know what, I'm going to find out something more hardcore about this. Now, Neptune is all of those things, though, right? But it also deals with a dimension beyond the physical. And the 12th house has to do with our ancestral league, because this is your mom and your dad and everybody else upline, grandma and grandpa and so on. Pluto's your aunts and uncles and cousins. Scorpio, the 8th house. And then Neptune, the 12th house, is your ancestral league, but it's also the collective unconscious. And therefore, we are a human being with a soul that goes back to the beginning of time. However that we see it shape-shifting, it's quite fine with me how anybody thinks of it. And it is also your immediate ancestral connection to your ancestral league in your family. And it can show actual physical and historical things. But it's also your psychic connection to your family historically. So that maybe your parents weren't alcoholics, but maybe your grandfather or your great-grandfather was, or your grandmother. I mean, the secret drinkers of women in previous generations, like 3 generations back, was really high. I mean, when Bill W. formed Alcoholics Anonymous, it was for men. But now, of course, we have like incredible branches of AAs of all different kinds, and it includes women. But women weren't included in the sort of recovery programs. It was still hidden that women were drunks, or they took laudanum, or that they were hooked on happy pills. I mean, Thy Neighbor's Wife by Gay Talese in the 60s really had a big statement to make about, women. And also, the pill taking, Mummy's Little Helpers. Women are easily addicted just as well as men, as are young people, and it's never too late. And that's something I have told my kids. And also now my grandchildren, who are between the ages of 16 and 21, is, kids, it's never too late. It's never too late to become a drug addict, an alcoholic, or anything, because it runs in the family. And they said, oh yeah, mom told us. And I went, of course, because we talk. Our generation talks. Nobody has talked until this generation. So that's why I put that picture up, to make it really simple, because the moon is our natal family. This is the 8th house, the 4th house is our natal family and our family downline. 8th house is our lateral family. And the 12th house is our ancestral family. So it's all of ever extensive humans from a millennia ago as well, going back to the origins of Homo sapiens, or even before. I mean, we're maybe related to a Neanderthal. Indeed, maybe one of our old families. Why are people interested in that kind of thing? Why do people study archaeology? Why do people study, the heavens? Why did Carl Sagan take it upon himself to be so incredibly and deeply involved in, not only being a rigorous scientist, but not only that, but, a popularizer, and one of the 186 scientists in the 80s who opposed and signed an edict against astrology, he did not sign. So wonder why. Was he burned at the stake? Did he tell on somebody? Was he, one of the Grand Inquisitors? I don't know. We all have a debt. I mean, Nick Campy and I once were walking out on a promontory out near Brighton and in England, and we were feeling quite good, and we were looking at the out at the ocean and watching the waves come in and the tide go out and all of that. And he said, what on earth is it that possessed us to become astrologers? And I said, well, maybe we did something really horrible in a past life. Like, maybe I've always thought I might have been Cardinal Richelieu. And he said, oh, I was Torquemada. And I went, there you go. That's why we're paying our debts. So we have to pay our debts to astrology. Here's just a quickie. I've actually shown this a few times, but I'm just going to say this is a really quick one. And and who was I speaking to earlier who was born right during this period of time? This is the moment in time that we are now praying would just come back so we could do it again. I mean, the EPA was signed in 1972, and now they've taken it away, the Environmental Protection Action. And they've just shown on my news on my iPhone this morning, there's a Russian icebreaker going through, taking stuff down, and there's no ice to break. It's the first time ever. So there's we're really looking at a long-term thing that we all saw under this aspect. Okay, so this is actually a client. However, this is a global aspect that took place in the time that I have selected here, February of 1965. It looks to me like the sort of epiphany. Oh, that's a good word. For this sort of revolution. The reason I'm doing it is that this is part of him. His moon, his fourth house, his family, his moon is in Taurus, conjunct Jupiter, opposite Neptune. Okay, what's really interesting is that he has always loved, he's a very fabulous man, very, very bright, always a very hard consciousness worker, as well as an incredible legal, he's a lawyer. And his spiritual work is intense. His whole dynamic seems to be bound upon breaking the rage that lies within him. And I'm going, okay, take that rage, go to the courtroom and give them hell and win your case. I mean, there's always ways that physically we can work it out, but how do we work it out in our souls when your moon is opposite Neptune from your family? Big secrets, lots of secrets in the family. He was an Aquarius person, born with the T-cross to the Neptune as well, right? And so his Aquarius part splits off and actually can, really look at things very objectively whilst he's still in this sort of turmoil internally. It's an interesting combination, Aquarius. I think that's one of the talks that I really liked that my colleague did here in Santa Fe about the Aquarian split. And so he comes out of a family that was basically what I would call enmeshed, as it in my family dynamics book, Moon Neptune, Neptunian family is enmeshed, and the emotional nature is governed basically by the maternal or the feminine function. And he has a very, very gentle, tender side to himself, but he also has this raging bull. I mean, he's a great athlete as well. and so are his sons. And so he has a family dynamic that's smothering, okay, that's all enveloping, that has some kind of secret history. Part of that secret history probably has to do with the fact that they're Jews, but they're non-practicing Jews. They're not, involved in anything. They're just social Jews. In other words, it is part of their makeup. However, they do live in a part of the United States which doesn't really have a lot of Jewish activity going on, so they don't do that. He has taken it upon himself, however, to have this most incredible inscription on his wall in his office, that it's all in Hebrew, and it's about his name. I just love it. So his name is very important. So there's the moon, Neptune, and the planet Pluto involved with Saturn, and Pluto is the natural ruler, as of the 8th house. The moon is the natural ruler of the 4th house, and Neptune is the natural ruler of the 12th house, and he's got Chiron in Pisces. So there is, and it's exactly opposite to Pluto. So we're looking again at something that is very much karmically tied in. Pluto is square the nodal axis, right? And you're going to see this in the chart I'm going to show you next, which is really a story. But he's got Pluto square along, sorry, my tell. Technology is fabulous. Let me just turn my phone off. Right. And so, all right, so far, because even though I have no contact with you guys, is there anything that anybody, is this good enough for now, just to give a quick point out? I'm sure you're all sharp enough to have picked up what I talked about.
Yep, I'm with you.
Okay. I really should. Okay. All right. This is a dedication. This is to my very best friend ever in my entire world of life. And his horoscope is phenomenal. His ancestral legacy is profound. His life is amazing. And his dying in a time when men and women, because they never again talk about the junkie women that died of AIDS, but he died of AIDS, and he made his choice. Like, he was at the hospital, he'd had enough, he'd gone and given his last seminar at the Washington United Astrology Conference in DC. That April, it would have been, I guess, April, just before his birthday. And then we had to fly home really fast because he was fading. We put him into the hospital, and then he died. And he chose his death, really, because he could have just lingered for a while. And of course, we were all called in to discuss what did we want. We wanted just comfort and palliative care. But it's sort of cute, really, and I don't mind sharing this with everyone. That is that the nurses had come in and found him in the morning. He wasn't in bed, and so they're like racing into the because they had little toilets in Middlesex Hospital. It had a special AIDS ward. It was just very, very advanced in England in those days, in the 90s. Very advanced, way, way better than here. And he had gone into the bathroom, and Howard and I had talked a lot about when he was going to die, because the transit of the planet Pluto was like going back and forth his 10th house 3 times, exactly, stationing on it 3 times. And we all know, anybody who's read retrograde planets knows that whenever the outer planet is retrograde, the sun is always in the opposition zone in the sky, so that when and the sun moves 1 degree a day, so 59 degrees to 1 degree, 59 minutes to 1 degree, 2 minutes every single day. And so therefore it actually has like almost a 3-month regular to 4 months, well, it's actually 4.5 months, of retrogression of an outer planet beyond the planet Jupiter, okay? So when Pluto's going back and forth, the sun is trekking slowly, day by day, to the point where it will actually reach his IC opposite the transit of Pluto, I call it the flashpoint. Well, just to precede his life, he died on May 12th, 1992, with the transiting sun on his IC of the end of the matter in old-fashioned astrology, opposite Pluto at his midheaven. His vocation was complete. So it was perfect timing. And this is a picture I took of him in the Sydney Harbor because he'd always wanted to go to Australia. So I quickly whipped together with a colleague of mine down there, kind of pushed ourselves into speaking at the conference that January of 92, of doing seminars down in Melbourne with Glennis Lawton and oh, my dear friend, my Canadian friend. Why am I forgetting the husband's name? He's my old friend from Canada. Anyway, we were teaching at Chiron Center down there, Chiron Center, just totally symbolic. And we just had an absolute blast. And he got to go to Australia. We came back, and in that time frame, it was evident that we would go to this conference, the UAC conference, and he had done everything he ever wanted to do. And so he was memorialized, and I just loved that. I wanted to show that sweet thing. November of 89. Okay, here we have a legacy. I mean, first of all, in The Hero with 1,000 Faces, Joseph Campbell talks a lot about the treasure from the ancestral family. And in Howard's life, his intellectual prowess wasn't immediately evident. In fact, one night when we were visiting from England to Connecticut, to Hartford, where his parents lived, from one very wonderfully casual moment in time, his father was, typically Jewish, quiet man. Mother was like absolutely Jewish woman, wife. Yeah, I mean, truly she was. I mean, it just is such a classic archetype, delightful, but also incredibly irritating at times because nobody could get a word in edgewise, least of all her husband. So anyway, so Howard and I'm lying on the bed, and Howard's slouching over in a chair, and they're lying on the bed. And, his dad said, Max, his dad, who lived to be 100, he said, I've got to ask you guys this. Why are such intelligent people involved and wasting your minds on something like astrology? And Howard said, well, that's hard to explain because we aren't wasting our minds. And it's the only thing that, that he was called toward. And it seems evident that that's exactly what we're doing. Well, look at Howard's chart. Moon in Taurus, opposite Chiron, and his moon in the 4th house. It's exactly squaring Mars and Saturn and Pluto. And so and I'm just going to run through this a bit, he also has the planet Saturn ruling his 12th house, which is part of the square from the family home dynamic. The planet Neptune is being opposed by Mercury, but at the midpoint, close to the midpoint anyway, is of Sun Mercury, the mind and the intellect and the investment of one's resources, is opposite Neptune in the 8th house. There isn't one house that isn't implicated in something really profound and possibly even mysterious that takes place in the ancestral realm. Now, the thing about Howard is he goes back a long way. Let me just try and move this thing again. There we go. As it says here, it's a legacy that leads back to the ancient Hebrew world. he is an example of direct lineage through the parental line, in particular his father, Sasportas. The mother's background is not really great. She doesn't know when she was born or where. Her mother was fleeing from the Russian Revolution of the 1918-20s, in that time frame, and I think she was born trapped in a fence, and gave birth to in the snow as they crossed the border out of Russia, and arrives to Ellis Island and settled in Connecticut, where she eventually met her lifelong husband, who is the descendant of Jacob Sasportas, the rabbi. Now, the story of Jacob Sasportas is, there is a major link to it, and I did all this research when we buried Howard. We buried him in Golders Green, which is the oldest Jewish Erev sacred site and cemetery in England. And that's where he wanted to be. And so we took him there and had his funeral there, and he was, he rests there. And some of his ashes we took back over to Connecticut so that they could sit on the stone. And his family, this is for his family compound in their one in Connecticut. But in Golders Green is really interesting because, and it's when I started writing something about Howard Sasportas' heroic journey, which actually is in one of the British AA Journal magazines as an article, but I also did one on his heroic journey. I wrote a prefix to the houses too, when it was reprinted by Flair, and he asked me if I'd write the what do they call that, the sort of introduction, and I did that. But here's the thing, this word up here is the Hebrew word for tzaddik. Now, a tzaddik is not your ordinary wise man. A tzaddik is a teacher. He's a benevolent and absolutely, utterly invested human being in the spiritual, metaphysical, and religious doctrine. All three rolled into one becomes a wise man. And so a tzaddik is a wise man who teaches. And that's exactly what Howard was. And I didn't know that until he died, until I started really soothing myself by doing hundreds of horoscopes and trying to figure everything out, and what was all this about. And I still don't really know. However, I do know that being a tzaddik, as a wise teacher, his great something grandfather, Jacob Sasportas, was a Sephardim, a Jew from the Iberian Peninsula. Sephardim are also Arabic, okay? And so it's very interesting that Howard's appearance was, he was kind of a classical Jew, but at the same time there was an Arabic tone to his complexion, and there was also a kind of, he had this incredibly fabulous wit which I think his father had, but his mother never let him get a word in edgewise, so he was never able to get the joke out on time. But Howard was absolutely wicked. Everybody thinks, wow, what a loving spiritual man. Well, if you had Moon in the 4th house in Taurus, square Pluto, Saturn, and Mars, that is not really very loving. It's actually wicked as hell. And we used to have a riot. We would wet ourselves laughing with our black humor. It was just constant. One day we were stumbling along as he was walking on his cane, by this time just around the corner from where he lived and where I lived and where his best friend from school lived, from Connecticut. And, he was really sick. And so we were talking about we were trying to make a game out of reading, interpreting. I know we wanted to interpret the meaning of real estate signs, and so we were doing that. And then we came along a great big dumpster, right? What they call, yeah, a dumpster, or a big garbage dump thing you put in the street for throwing big trash. And we said, okay, the answer to the question. This is a riddle, because we had come to this very questioning point. And I said, the answer to the question will be, one of us will reach in, and the first thing that we get out of the dumpster, we will read, and it will be the answer. And so he reached in, didn't look, handed it to me. I looked at it. It was an envelope addressed to the Nasty Suicides, which was obviously a punk rock band, I guess. And well, we just fell about laughing. I mean, we were in hysterics. By the time we got to our friend's house, he opened the door and he goes, "Oh God, now what have you guys been up to?" And we said, "Well, here, we're looking at this." And he says, No, we'll not have any nasty suicides here today. And I said, well, that's fine, because it's all just a joke anyway. So this sort of inherited wit and humor is very typically, in a way, I mean, there's a certain humor, that Jews have that other ethnicities do not. And except for some of the Irish, they have a similar kind of a thing. But his grandfather, great, he was actually sent off in the mid-1600s in the Armada of Queen Isabella. And in 1653, he arrived in England, Howard Sasportas. He was made a rabbi, and just after the death of Cromwell, but still under Cromwell's edict of freedom of worship. Now, this is one thing, we hear all sorts of terrible things about Cromwell. But the fact is that England, at that point, harbored, like Grenada did at one point, Grenada, all three, Jewish, the Islamic, and the Christians. God, I forgot about those guys. Anyway, so all three had freedom. They could have their churches, they could have their synagogues, and they could have their mosques. And so he was the first of the rabbis. Actually, he was the first rabbi in England, and he founded Golders Green, as I mentioned, and the synagogue there. However, in 1656, he fled to Amsterdam, where many of the Jews did actually go. So there's a huge Jewish contingent in Holland. And there's some stories about that, by the way, that are current. Might be worth looking into if you're interested. And so having Howard's ashes put around this stone in the Golders Green Cemetery after the funeral, celebrating his remarkable life, it just seems so appropriate. But I didn't know any of this until much later. Hang on. Whoops. I'm not finished yet. Okay, so more about Howard. Get rid of these sidebars here. So when I look at the chart, I'm seeing almost every signature that shows an ancient connection: Moon square Saturn, ruler of the 12th house, Neptune, of the Ancestral League, the ancestral souls. Also, Judaism claims to be, well, and I certainly don't know, the oldest religion in the biblical sense, in the sense of having it written. We're really now into I think it's 566 years this year. And they date that to the beginning of Judaism. And so we're looking at the oldest religion, Moon square Saturn, old religion, ruler of the 12th, linked to a very heavy past. Jews have been sort of pushed all over the world. They are the wanderers, right? And of course, Howard defected from his own homeland, yeah, because of the sort of scorpionic wound. We have Pluto exactly square his nodal axis, and the sort of karmic connection to that, especially with Saturn and Pluto, is that he was born out of World War II really pissed off. So, he and I actually discussed this business of him being in the ovens before he was born, because he was born in 48, right? I was born in 47. I know I rose up off of the battlefield of World War II really, really angry. And, which is why a whole lot of our generation did. The sort of baby boomers, were definitely there. And so he was born out of a historical past, not just mythological past, where there was death and destruction, annihilation by forces not even imaginable. But if you know what rules gas, Neptune. And he has Neptune in Libra, as our generation does, which is the ruler of his 12th house naturally, but it's also involved with Saturn as a sextile, and Neptune's in the 8th house of death. So his thing about being gassed in a previous life, I believe it. I also believe that his, the whole story about his parental heritage shows a tremendous amount of wounding. And Howard was interesting because when his dad had asked us about why did you choose astrology? Well, so we didn't choose astrology, it just became part of what we do. And it's an ancient tradition. It's something that, that we really love. And the parents were happy with that. I mean, they were sincerely, and for the first time, according to Howard, actually interested. Because, you see, they thought that they like to fantasize that I was Howard's girlfriend, and that they would tell their friends, their other Jewish friends in Connecticut, in Hartford, Howard's fiance is visiting us, which we thought was terribly cute because, of course, Howard was gay. There's no way. I mean, we loved each other passionately, and if he hadn't been gay and had AIDS, maybe something would have been different. But it wasn't, and that's fine with me because, sexuality, can really destroy a relationship because it puts territorialism. So Howard and I had a very profound, deep love, family love, very much in the family, Venus and Gemini, but it was asexual. Yeah, it was non-territorial. His connection to his past lives and his lifestyle in the current one is also heretical. I mean, look what happened to even as recently as Oscar Wilde. He never wrote a damn thing after De Profundis, which was written in Reading Gaol after he had been put in prison for sodomy.
Excuse me, Erin, we have 10 minutes left.
Oh, that's great. Can anyone comment on this? I'd love it if people just said something they'd like to say about this horoscope and about Howard and his contribution, because I mean, with Venus and Gemini, obviously, he was writing about families. He was completely and utterly obsessed with families. Well, most Jews are, and so are anyone who's been abused. Now, he wasn't abused. His mother was a shopping addict. She had a whole room full of clothes, none of which she wore. I mean, it was hilarious. His father was a paper hanger, and he was really hoping that his son might take over his business. But Howard had short, thick, stubby fingers, and he didn't even have shoes that could tie up because he couldn't. He was completely and totally incapable of doing anything with his fingers except write and type and to think. And that was where his whole life was 4th house legacy. Somewhere down the line, he got the mind of a genius, Venus sextile Pluto, and the planet Mercury in Aries, 5 Aries, exactly trine Pluto, ruler of his 8th house, and also ruler of his 5th house of creativity, wherein we find Uranus. So he was obviously very different in his way of relating. And also, he wanted freedom from family. Yeah, because that was an important function for him. So anybody have any questions about what I've been talking here about Howard and his chart?
Yes, hello.
Yes.
I have loved like readings Howard Sasportas. He has been the first author that I really connect with, and I've learned astrology with him.
Oh, Marie, that's so wonderful to hear. He's listening to you now.
Well, I mean, I thought he was just incredible. I was curious in his chart about the Mars, Saturn, and Pluto. They are intersected. There is no...
you know what? Let me just interrupt you right there. There's no such thing as interception. Just look at it. It's a big house. The first house and the seventh house are enlarged based upon an accident of location and season. Now, interception was invented by some astrologer sitting in a basement, never seeing the sky, not even considering the possibility of what really was going on. I mean, that's where we had to come out of. We had to come out of the dark ages. So what we have here with real positioned houses, which is why I don't use equal houses, and I really do believe in the angles. I not necessarily am wedded to the house system, but I am wedded to the angles. Those are the most important parts, the horizon and the midheaven. When they're at an angle this tight, in other words, a sextile between the midheaven and the ascendant rather than a square, if you were born at the equator, you end up with getting an enlarged house. What that means, or an intercepted house, what it truly means is, let's just say that you have the transit of Saturn going on in your chart, and it's transiting through Capricorn. It goes through there so that's about 2 years, 2.25 years. And then it hits the ascendant, and then it spends not only 2.5 years, but a whole nother year. So it spends 3.5 years in the first house transiting, and then zoom, 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 and then 3.5 years in the seventh. So it's where size equals time and duration. And so I've really taken a long time to come to this. It's 50 years of thinking and using intercepted houses, like drawing the little sort of line in here. And, when we didn't have this kind of an image in the olden days, in the 60s, when we were learning astrology. So I'm not meaning rude when I said there are no such thing as intercepted houses. I'm being really stern to say, I want you to open your mind to think, okay, these two houses, because they're, balanced, they must be considered as the most important lesson in the chart, because anything transiting them spends more time in those two houses than in any other house of the horoscope. So Howard's biggest lessons were himself and understanding his Aquarianness, Uranus, and his seventh house of relationships, and having some very interesting and unusual relationship ways of being. Had a couple of very solid partners in his life, like really long-term relationships. But very often, particularly gay men, they don't have this issue about monogamy. In fact, Jim Lewis used to tell me that Haight Street, or the Castro district, was full of guys staring up at the sky saying, "Oh, I want to meet the right one." And they're not even looking at any of the guys on the street. And so Howard had what I would say a normal homosexual life, and that is that he and his partner had other guys over for the night or something like that. And so that, Mars, Saturn, Pluto, that would be considered a social anomaly. I mean, that's absolutely unthinkable. Oh my God, threesomes between men, help. So that's part of what the vertex, which is cosmic encounters, and one of them I'll tell you because it's really good and he'd love it, is that there was always this guy at the Heath in the English Big Park that it was so handsome that he just thought he was fantastic. And so one night he rang up a call center for rent boys, and so he asked this person to come over, and the guy comes over, and it was the guy in the park. So it was like, oh my God, I've struck gold. And so they just had a lovely evening. And it wasn't all just about sex, you know. I mean, it was about, you know, male sexuality is very different than feminine sexuality, isn't it? And so that, you know, man on man is very different than woman on woman. And I often think, you know, that women relationships are like almost too many wombs. You know, there's a lot of cats and chickens and eggs and flowers, and it's quite lovely. But with men, it's very rough. It's rough stuff, yeah. And so I guess that's part of what that's about, is the attraction to the danger. And a lot of men were attracted to that danger. And then the AIDS epidemic came out. And now I have a surviving brother who actually is not AIDS. He's HIV, and he's been HIV for, let's say, 40 years. And he is one of the test cases of why certain people don't slip into AIDS, etc. And part of the thing they've come up with in the research in Canada is that if you're First Nations or Native American, as they call them in the States, or Indian, I don't know about Aboriginals in other cultures though, but they tend not to cross over into the AIDS virus, which is really an interesting thing because we're all part Indian. Was that useful and not rude?
I just love it. I just love to hear that there is no interception, and it's just a planet will spend more time there, like mostly like when you think about the faster moving planet. I do have planet Saturn intercepted in the 4th house, so and it's ruling my 8th house. So I was thinking about the lineage, you know, about the family.
Oh boy, you've got a big lesson in your family.
Oh, I certainly do.
Oh man, have they ever waited on you or what? I mean, have you emigrated?
Well, actually, I do have also Uranus squaring the node, and Mark told me at some point that I have broken the karmic link in the family.
Well, actually, you were born to do that. Whether or not you can, I'm not sure. However, you're definitely born to disrupt and you know, break away from the family legacy.
And I certainly did.
Well, good for you. Because the person I was going to use today, she did the same thing from Italy. She was an amazing woman, and she left with her family when Uranus went over her midheaven, and she's just had phone calls from her ancestors, or from people from her family that live in the States that she didn't know existed. Hers is a good chart too, but I needed Howard today. I really needed to talk about him. And I'm really glad that made sense to you, because to me, if I see a mystery, and that's a mystery, and I hear some kind of dogma, I say, okay, get rid of the dogma, get rid of everything. Just try and figure out what it does. And that's what I've come up with.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. It's such an interesting coincidence that, you know, because this guy has really marked me as a person. Like when I start studying astrology, I really connect with all of his books, and I got them all, and I just, you know, that
I know we're almost closing, but the thing is, I want to say I'm really glad to hear that, and I think he's one of the best writers in plain language with exceptional understanding and wisdom underneath. Yeah, and I've never heard anybody say anything except what you've just said. Honestly, I'm not trying to diminish your uniqueness, but the fact is that you're just describing who he was. Everybody thinks that about Howard's books. Everyone thinks that. And when he was talking, and the horrible thing is I was able to get a whole bunch of copies of my lectures. The the British Astrological Society has an incredible archive of everything recorded for the conferences. And I had got up 5 of mine, but I only got 1 of Howard's. And God, it was awful. I mean, that I have 2 of his voice. But as a writer, I mean, that's how he stayed alive. He took steroids, and for 6 months, he actually wrote the transcription of Richard Idemann's books, who died in 1986 of AIDS. Okay, and Liz Green was supposed to do it, but she just defaulted on the whole thing. So Howard said, "This is great. Pump me full of steroids. I'll do it." 6 months later, he's written 2 of Richard Idemann's books, which were published. And so that kept him going, because he looked at Richard and he said, give me life, I'll do everything I can for you. Mm. So he believed in ghosts too.
Ghosts.
I love you guys. Thank you.
Okay, Erin, thank you so much. We've got about 3 minutes if you wish.
Oh, if anybody has anything they'd like to put in.
Yeah. Anybody, any questions or comments?
That was brilliant, Erin. A lot of what you were talking about, as far as like his family, the hoarding, and just his work and everything that he needed to do. I saw that, to me, clearly reflected in that nodal axis and that square that.
Interesting, Wanda.
Mars and Pluto square to the nodal axis.
Yeah, when you talk about hoarding, you see that word. You see, this is what I love, why I like feedback, is people tell me stuff that I didn't say. And like the moon in Taurus, square Mars, Saturn, and Pluto would have been so against hoarding. Like Howard dressed very simply. He was like a gentleman. I mean, he was absolutely, we were naughty like mad, but he was a gentleman. But the whole hoarding thing, like his mother's room, used to be like a nightmare to him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what I was saying. I saw that in the,
all that stuff. Opposite, he was wounded by his mother's clothing. Moon in Taurus, her stuff, her things. And she wanted to be free and just have one of each.
Mm-hmm. I loved it, really, and it was nice to be able to see it, reflected in the chart.
I just feel so good that I did his chart today. Hi, Howard. Everybody loves you.
So, Erin, yes, I loved how this chart came to life through your sharings with us. I can see how that 1st and 7th houses are so important, with the 1st house Aquarius being such a great astrologer, and then his, gay life being so important to him in the 7th.
Yeah, he wasn't a political gay though. Whereas like Jim was a political gay, he was non-political. And, he didn't like to be classified. Yeah, sure. That's interesting, isn't it?
And I love how Saturn rules that 12th house, and Saturn's found in the 7th house, so close to Mars and Pluto, and that is that very extreme violence in the ancestral family.
Yeah. I see, he and I were born 6 months apart, and in November 9th of 1947, Mars, Saturn, and Pluto were conjunct, but they were not retrograde. By the time it went to April, Mars had gone retrograde and direct, okay? And so that we have Mars at the same degree, 20, and Saturn and Pluto are retrograde, whereas they weren't when I was born, because I was born with the sun in Scorpio. Yeah? In fact, his moon is on my north node.
Which accounts for your deep friendship.
Yeah. It was just everything you could possibly imagine, really.
Beautiful.
And so there, I give it up to Neptune, really.
Mm-hmm.
I want to say that I am absolutely thrilled with what you're doing with the Evolutionary Astrology group.
Thank you. Thank you.
I just am amazed, and I think it's fantastic.
We love it too.
Oh, good. I'm glad that you're not hating it and sleep. You know what I mean? That would be awful. Oh my God, we've got to do another bloody workshop. Okay.
No, I'm absolutely passionate about this. Absolutely love it. I feel like
Good.
my chart has come alive and I have come alive. I feel embodied for the first
Yeah,
time.
no, you're like me. I was a dynamo in my early days. I mean, I still am. I'm going to be doing, by the way, I'll be being taken on as an announcement to you guys first. Is I'm going to be joining the Kepler College faculty. They've asked me to do it, and they want me to do it on archetypal astrology and contemporary practice.
Excellent, beautiful. Erin,
Yeah, so.
Can you please, do you have the stop share button? Oh, well, no, just not yet. We'll go back to the attendee panel soon.
Stop. Do I stop sharing now?
Well, we can leave this one up. I just thought it would be nice to see everybody on the...
I think it would be great too. I'm going to stop sharing.
Okay, there we are. So we're back.
Yay, I can see everybody. Everybody's got muted.
Everyone looks
Christy.
happy, very happy. Had a good astrological feed. So any final thoughts, anybody?
Everybody's being very contemplative and thoughtful.
I think they're
Thank you so
that
much.
was awesome. It was totally awesome, Erin. Thank you so much. A lot to think about.
Sue, thank you. Yeah, I always like seeing you here. Thank you.
I love seeing you here.
Oh, that's so good. Isn't that fun?
It was absolutely fascinating, Erin. Thank you very much.
Carolyn, thank you. I know it is fascinating. I mean, thanks.
It is.
I mean, I'm fascinated because I'm fascinated. Like, why wasn't I? I'm so intelligent. I could have been other things. Why wasn't I? I'm sorry, Max. I just couldn't be a surgeon.
So, Marie, you had something to say?
Yes, I was going to say how thankful I am for that lecture. It was really, really an eye-opening, not only on the subject of the lineage, but also on Howard Sasportas, and like he has been such a big hero of mine, and I really I've drink all of his words, like, I mean, it's like you say, he was the first one who will talk regular language to present astrology and all of the planet and the way they were working, and it's just amazing, like the way he was a teacher.
He founded the Contemporary Astrology series, and within a couple of months, they headhunted me because he was sick, and so that's how I became the editor for Contemporary Astrology series with Arcana Penguin in London. I mean, he did so much, I mean, this man was like really something else. Yeah, and then teaching for the CPA. I mean, he really was the soul. I always said that, kind of Liz was the intellect and the sort of scholarly type, although Howard was he actually graduated summa cum laude from Tufts, which is a very intense university in the United States in the East, very important. And he also was the first person and the only person still to this day to pass the Faculty of Astrological Studies grind of a course. It's unbelievably rigorous. He wrote the whole thing in one day, and he got 100% right.
Wow.
So, Max, we weren't stupid.
Okay, guys, we're going to have to wind down now. Erin, thank you so much. That was so brilliant. Incredible.
Thank you.
Loved
Thank
it.
you.
So, unmuting everybody, and we'll see you again.
It's not like
Thank you.
divide and conquer is the problem. It's assimilation is the problem. And that's always been the problem. And that's like what I said, what Philip Roth writes about at length, and so do a lot of other Jewish
She
authors.
doesn't know where.
So it's
Okay,
I
everybody.
love
I
this.
mean,
This
he does
is
a
great.
great job of
Are you
it
kidding?
too.
Are you kidding? The Jewish
all these
psychiatrists are
examples
the best.
are in books like that.
Okay, bye everybody.
Which doesn't make yours invalid. It just means
I love it.
that
Up with Jews.
it's easier to
Okay.
tell.
Thank you, Erin. Bye, darling.
Bye-bye. Love
Well,
you all.
you're unique.